Dear guests, friends, and colleagues, let me welcome you to our seminar in Balkan and Eastern Mediterranean archaeology. Today, Dr. Kamen Boyadzhiev will bring us back to the Copper Age while presenting the results from recent fieldwork in Tel Yunatsite, one of the most important prehistoric sites in the Eastern Balkans, which attracted scholars from Bulgaria, Russia, Greece, Germany, and France, who in one or another way participated to the research there. Yunatsite is also home of one of the most important field schools in prehistoric archaeology organized by the Balkan Heritage Foundation.
Okay, so as Bogdan already said, the topic today will be the Tel site at Yunatsite and the excavations of the Copper Age layer and the information, the new insights which it gives us to this very interesting period of the prehistory in Balkans. So for those of you who don't know the site and the area, just briefly, Tel Yunatsite is located in the Balkans, in southeastern Europe, in the westernmost part of the Thracian plain, or the Maritsa River Valley. As you can see on these maps, it is surrounded on north, west, and south from mountains. However, this is not an isolated, but rather quite communicative area after all. So the area, the Maritsa River Valley is opened both to the east, to the Black Sea coast, and following the Maritsa River to the south, to the Aegean coast as well. There is also very suitable route to the Aegean coast following the Mesta River Valley. There are some mountain passes which are penetrable to the north, to the Danube River Valley, and also here runs the more suitable pass through to the Sofia Field, the Struma and Iskar and Morava River valleys. And it is not by chance that this red line here marks one of the most important routes of the Roman Empire in this area, the so-called Via Militaris. So again, very communicative place, very suitable for early prehistoric settling. The site itself is situated on a wall river terrace on the right bank of the old bed of the Tuponica River, close to its confluence with the main river in the area, the Maritsa River. Nowadays, the Tuponica River runs almost 1 kilometer to the east, but we have sure evidence both from some geological trenches, and also you can see it very well visible here on this digital elevation model of the area, that at some point in time, the Tuponica River made this light meander just to the east of where the Tel site is, this spot here. So we may suggest that when the first settlers came here, they used namely this nice, suitable river terrace just close to the source of fresh water which the Tuponica provided. The Tel site is one of the largest Tel sites, multi-layered sites in the Thracian plain, especially in the western part of it, with a diameter of 110 meters and height of 12 meters from the modern surface, as you can see on these pictures from different sites. And because of this, it attracted the attention of archaeologists more than a century ago, when it was first noted in some archaeology books. The first trench excavations were made in 1939 by Vasil Mikov in the central east part of the Tel. You can see here these archive photos, how the Tel looked before the excavations, and this very first trench campaign of Mikov far back in 1939. Just in one season, he excavated this quite big trench measuring 25 by 10 meters and almost 8 meters deep. He did not reach virgin soil, but he revealed quite promising layers from different periods, especially the early Bronze Age and Copper Age periods, which showed the huge potential of the site. However, this was just the year when the Second World War started, so any further excavations were postponed for a long time. It was in 1976 when large-scale excavations of the site started in its eastern part, marked in red here, covering almost one half of the Tell surface. During the years, in these more than 40 years of excavations, the team was joined by a Russian team in the 80s and 90s. Then, since 2001 to 2011, there were joint Bulgarian-Greek excavations. And since 2012, just Bulgarian team continued the excavations under the directorship of Kamen Boyadzhiev and me as co-director. So through these more than 40 years, the quite long inhabitants and quite complex stratigraphy of the site has been largely revealed, starting from top to bottom with the medieval cemetery, a Roman age fort. So the Romans used this hill as a strategic height in the flat area surrounding it. And this fort was also connected with a Roman settlement and cemetery just next to the Tell. Then there is a layer from the first millennium BC or early and late Iron Age, unfortunately quite heavily disturbed by the Roman age fort and the medieval cemetery. Under it is about 5-meter thick layer from the early Bronze Age, covering most of the third millennium BC, really important for understanding the early Bronze Age culture in this part of the Balkans and the cultural transformations. A large part of these excavations have been published and they will stay outside of the scope of my talk today. But again, it's really, really interesting and important part of the Tell Yunatsite's excavations. And under this and under hiatus, which separates at some places of the Tell, the early Bronze Age occupation and the lower level, we have more than 5 meters of cultural deposits from the Copper Age or Chalcolithic, spanning over a large part of the 5th millennium BC. Okay, something happened. And can you hear me? Okay, okay, now it goes because my presentation blocked for a while. Sorry, I think now it is okay. Okay, so before going back to the Tell and its stratigraphy, I'll first like to show you some interesting results which the Bulgarian Greek excavations provided. So in the early 2000s, we made a number of excavations, of trench excavations, which are quite well visible on this satellite view. Here, these, let's say, white lines. To the west of the Tell, trying to find the cemetery of the Tell. We didn't find the cemetery, but we found a number of other interesting stuff, including, most importantly, something we did not know before this, a large early Copper Age of Tell use of the space. So in all these trenches here, remains from the early Copper Age have been attested. They were not really excavated. We just hit these layers and stopped our trenches at this point in most of them. But for sure, we attested this early Copper Age of Tell site, which was not known before this, because it stayed under a thick alluvial layer at some places or under later cultural layers in others. Also, in some parts of this area, especially here in the northwest, of Tell site from the late Chalcolithic and early Bronze Age was attested, and early Bronze Age inhabitants was also attested to the south of the Tell, which also opened new perspective, new research questions to us. And these perspectives and these new research questions were also continued with the next interesting thing that was discovered during the Bulgarian Greek excavations in the early 2000s. This is a fortification system made of a clay wall and a ditch attested in the southern periphery of the Tell. We can say that this was like a kind of double working process. When people excavated the clay to make the ditch, they raised it to build the wall. to the inside of it. And thus they fortified the closest to the river part of this terrace. This thing happened somewhere in the early Copper Age, but not in the very beginning of the settling of the space. You can probably see here on this profile, this yellow stuff is the eroded clay wall, so this is the bedrock here, the sterile terrain, and you can see that the clay wall was built over probably two levels from the early Chalcolithic, though this is the very periphery. We cannot say for sure anymore about the stratigraphy, but for sure it was built over some inhabitants from the early Copper Age. When this fortification was made, it more or less inside of it, the cultural layer began to accumulate much faster with much heavier, let's say, more debris, forming the tail as let's roughly call it a kind of acropolis opposed to the off-tail side surrounding it. The fortification wall was made of clay with pebble levels, leveling it at some point to harden the construction. It is about 3.5 meters thick, preserved up to 2.5 meters, with a supposed height of about 5 meters in the late Chalcolithic. And the ditch is also quite impressive, about 4 meters deep and more than 5 meters wide. Again, these results and these new insights on the settlement structure during the Copper Age, with these off-tail inhabitants opposed to the fortified area of the tail, of course, brought to us a number of questions. What was the difference between the tail and the off-tail? Whether it reflected different use of the space or some social stratification or something else. Trying to answer these questions, 3 years ago, we started excavating 2 trenches, which you can see both on the pictures and on the map, in the southern periphery of the site, just close to this river meander, where we expected that the settlement should end. This is the southernmost of these 2 trenches. In it, only early Copper Age layer has been revealed, with a pile of debris and a dug-in feature here. This dug-in feature is interesting because for the first time on the site, it yielded earlier materials than the early Copper Age, or namely late Neolithic pottery. You can see this characteristic late Neolithic pottery in the upper part of the slide compared to the typical early Copper Age pottery with a lavish graphite decoration, incised decoration, sometimes combined with red paint and so on. The situation in the other trench, although it is less than 10 meters away from it, is, however, quite different and much more complex. So in this trench, named Trench 20, a layer from the early Bronze Age has also been attested, including 3 building levels, remains of 3 buildings on top of each other, an interesting dug-in feature, and a baby burial in a jar under the floor of the lowest house. And under this early Bronze Age layer, which ends here, we have about 2 meters of early Copper Age inhabitants, not inhabitants, but use of the space, which is really interesting for us, although it is still a bit enigmatic because the layer from the early Copper Age is quite different to what we know from the tail. So in the upper part, it is quite homogeneous layer, and just in its lower part, we start seeing these arc-shaped features. You can see when we go down, this is one trench with the post holes, another one, surrounding obviously some circular or oval spaces, which, however, unfortunately, go outside of our trench. Inside the part that we have excavated, there is almost nothing except of high concentration of pottery, so we cannot say for sure what these enclosures were, but there is nothing, not single evidence of, let's say, dwelling activities. And when we continue down, we attested this circular feature with the white ash inside, which, going further down, appeared to be a shallow dug-in feature filled with layers of ash and charcoals. Similar layers of ash and charcoals, one over the other, were also found to the north of it, together with remains, unfortunately, very poorly preserved remains of 2 fireplaces here, and 1 more fireplace here on the other side. This is the dug-in feature with consecutive layers of ash, charcoals, quite a lot of pottery, and very few bones and other materials. We're still discussing on the function of this feature, but for sure, all this situation, these layers of ash, these fireplaces, speak of some economic activities and surely not about dwelling ones. So at least in this part to the south of the Tell, at least from what we know from these trenches, we can say that this part of the Tell was not used for dwelling activities, but has had some specific economic functions. And this is very fresh information from our last season, so it is still a lot to be analyzed and discussed here, but for me this is quite important information regarding the settlement structure. And now getting back to the Tell itself and its quite complex stratigraphy, especially regarding the Copper Age, which I would like to stress on in the next minutes. So here this red stripe here marks the uppermost latest Copper Age settlement, marked as level B1, which is the only one that has been excavated on the entire eastern part of the Tell, let's say about 1/2 of the Tell surface and of the surface of this settlement. This red part here is the profile of the Mikos Trench, which you can see in more detail here, which shows really complex stratigraphy with a number of intersecting dug-in features, sloping remains of houses in different directions, and so on. And this complex stratigraphy in the Mikos Trench that has been attested in the profiles of this trench, unfortunately, is quite lost in terms of documentation, because, as I already told you, these excavations were made by Mikov, were made far back in 1939, just in one season, so we do not have too much documentation about it. So in the last 10 years, we decided to, let's say, stop with this entire excavation of the Tell surface, of the eastern part of the Tell surface, because we did not have the resource to excavate all this surface, which is quite large, in the detail that we wanted. So we decided to concentrate more on revealing on a smaller area the complex stratigraphy from the Copper Age, from the 5th millennium BC, going gradually down, excavating on one hand Mikos Trench, on the other hand the area just to the south of it. You can see it also on the scheme of the site, with the idea to merge the stratigraphy between what we knew for sure here, where the latest Copper Age settlement has been entirely excavated, and what at this point we did not know for sure, or namely what Vasil Mikov reached. Merging these two parts, these two pictures, clarifying the stratigraphy, and gradually going down to reveal the Copper Age layer at Yunatsite. At this point, at least 10 building levels have been attested from the Copper Age, covering a large part of the 5th millennium BC. The lowest levels, however, have been attested just in a small control trench here in the eroded eastern periphery of the Tell. Parts of the other 6 building levels, however, have been excavating, showing some very interesting results, which I would like to present you in brief now, starting maybe a bit unusually, but starting from the lowest to the highest ones, from the earliest to the latest, with these levels B6. This level B6, which dates to the final phase of the early Chalcolithic, around 4600 BC, which is marked by quite interesting and seldom preserved, seldom found in this time and area preserved construction of unburnt wooden planks, probably a wooden floor with remains of 2 ovens on top of it. You can see the graphic documentation of this quite well-made wooden floor construction of cut wooden planks, which show the woodworking abilities of these people far back in the 5th millennium BC. The next layer, which also dates to the final phase of the early Copper Age, is marked by remains of two buildings. Unfortunately, both of them partially destroyed by the Mikus Trench. The eastern one, however, is quite interesting, building B51. Its northeast part have been excavated. The eastern wall marked by this trench with post holes, quite massive floor construction made of clay wumps plastered with fine layer of clay on top of it, and quite big oven facility, square in shape, unfortunately damaged by a couple of later pits, part of it remaining under our control profile here, but still the preserved part revealed something which we, at least me, haven't seen so far in the Copper Age in Bulgaria. Or this is this wall of the oven with well-preserved inside decoration in this, let's say, rhombic meander, which is known from small clay models of ovens, but at least this is the only, at least for me, this is the only one real oven with such a decoration that I know from this period in Bulgaria. This is the other building from the same period, similar floor construction, which is again quite thick and which is not attested in the later periods, typical just for level B5. And on top of it, a building from level B4 in the red marking, as you can see, made of a wall of posts, rectangular building, and on the floor of this building, quite surprising find for us, this small golden bead, which dates to the middle Chalcolithic or the mid-5th millennium BC, and is probably one of the earliest golden artifacts known in Europe and in the world so far, surely predating the famous Varna I cemetery and this really famous and rich guy there. And then we go to the next level, level B3, which dates to the beginning of the late Copper Age, around 4400 BC. This building is very important for us because it gives us the connection between the Mikus Trench and the area to the south of the Mikus Trench. So the area between, as I already said, what we knew for sure in terms of stratigraphy and what we did not know until the excavation of this building. It's very important for us in terms of stratigraphy and merging the situation. For some reason, Vasil Mikov went not as deep as in the eastern part of its trench, then he went in the western. So he just hit the burned debris of this building here, but it not really excavated. So you can see this is the Mikus Trench here, the remains of this burned building, and this is its remains to the south with a clear stratigraphy following on top of this building. It is really interesting and really big building with the dimensions of about 12 meters and probably even more because we have not attested the southern wall yet, up to 7 meters in width. Its eastern wall and parts of the western and south and northern wall have been revealed. Unfortunately, a large part of it is damaged here by a later dug-in feature. Still, a lot of its interior has been attested, including two inner walls which separate the building into 3 premises. The eastern one is this narrow one, like a kind of corridor. It's quite strange. And it was found filled with fragmented vessels and animal bones, so maybe it was used as a kind of storage room. And in the northern building, especially in its northern part here, most of the facilities in this building were found, probably kind of clay plastered storage, although we found it filled just with the debris of the burned building. The oven in the northeastern part here, and in between them, a large storage vessel smashed in situ with typical decoration. This kind of storage vessels is continuously found through the Chalcolithic levels at Yunatsite, with the same repeating motifs, which obviously had some symbolic meaning for the Copper Age people, which you will see in a while in some other cases. Another interesting part of the inventory of this building is the large collection of Spondylus shell beads and bracelets, different kinds of beads. More than 40 of them have been found so far. Some of these button-like beads have also been replicated in different kinds of stone, usually marble, and also some bone figurines found close together in the northeastern part of the building. Some of them, especially this one, looking unfinished. So we may possibly guess that this was the working area of a local bone and shell craftsman. And then we go to the next level, level B2, which has been excavated on slightly larger area. We have no information from Mikkel's Trench about this level, but we have excavated parts of 3 buildings to the south of Mikkel's Trench and also 2 of them here. So we have some more information of the planning of the settlement from this late Chalcolithic settlement. I will not go into details of it. I would just like to concentrate a bit more on this building, 21B, which is the one which is almost entirely excavated. It has the same orientation and similar dimensions as the building from level B3, which we already saw, about 10.5 by 7.5 meters. Its eastern wall have been surely attested, parts of the southern, western walls as well. However, it shows different inner division than building B31. It has one very large premise covering about 80% of this building here, a small wall made of tiny posts here, which separates again a kind of narrow corridor premise, but unlike the one in B3, it was found empty. On the other hand, there was a high concentration of pottery and charred grains here in the south part of the south premise. Most of the facilities of the building were uncovered in the north part of the south premise, including the oven here, one clay platform here, and 2 partially dug in basin-like features made of clay plastered walls and bottom. They were found empty. Their function is still unsure, but maybe they were some kind of storages. We're still not sure. Unfortunately, the northwestern part of the building is disturbed by this dug-in feature from level B1, but in the northeastern part of the building, another premise was uncovered, which was heavily filled with fragments of vessels and charred botanical remains. So it seems that this was the storage room of this building. You can see different stages of the excavation of this northeastern premise with a number of fragmented vessels, some of them staying on their bases, like here on the floor of the premise, while others have been found scattered all over the place. So it seems that some of them were put maybe on shelves or something else, but in some height for sure. So it was very complex picture and very difficult to excavate and reveal the connection between all these vessels in the beginning. And in between them, there was a huge concentration of charred botanical remains, in some cases tightly connected with the fragmented vessels, like these examples here. But in few cases, we just had very compact concentrations of burnt botanical remains in between the burned debris, not close to any pottery. So we can guess that some of the food supplies were rather collected in some containers made from perishable materials, like, for example, leather bags or something else. The very huge botanical assemblage from this premise is dominated by barley and lentils, but also einkorn, emmer, rye, flax have been attested, different fruits like apples and pears, different nuts like acorns and walnuts. Some of them you can see here, very well preserved. Especially interesting for us was the find of almost 3,000 grape seeds in the northwest part of this premise. some of them with traces of maceration according to the analysis of Dr. Tsvetana Popova, to whom I'm really grateful. And according to her, we can suggest that this speaks for the preparation of some grape drink, possibly wine. I should just mention here that similar situations have been attested in the Kilitash. I saw that Zoe is here, so she may agree or not, but this situation has been published and also interpreted as very early evidence of wine production in the area. And this situation in the Kilitash is contemporaneous with the building, roughly contemporaneous with the building at Yunatsite. So again, we can speak of a kind of early evidences of wine production in the area of Southeastern Europe here. And also some remains of bread or porridge, which are also interesting. They're still to be further analyzed, but for sure there are some remains of grains inside, so some kind of grain food. Further analysis, I hope, may give us some more information on the cooking practices of this population. These are just some of more than 30 vessels restored from this premise, not the entire building, just this northeast premise. Different kinds of vessels, but as you can see, very often lavishly decorated with graphite and usually sharing the same kind of motifs, especially on the storage vessels with these spiral-like motifs and these, let's say, rhombic meanders on them. And another surprising find from this building is this golden ring pendant, which is quite typical for the late Chalcolithic in the Balkans, but quite seldom found in settlements, especially in sure stratigraphic context in settlements, which makes it quite important for us. A quick overview over the plan of the settlement and the building practices throughout these copper age settlements between levels B2 and B5, which we already discussed. So although in some of the cases, especially in the early levels, as you can see, just parts of the buildings have been excavated, in all of these cases, we have at least one wall attested. So we do have information about the orientation of these buildings, and we can see that they have systematic overlapping orientation, sometimes even overlaps of the plans of this building. And this orientation has specific deviation northeast to southwest, which we guess is caused by the main direction of the winds in this area. And I should just mention here that similar situations have been attested even in the Roman city of Philippopolis, which is close in the area. So even the strict Romans made this deviation from the cardinal points, probably adjusting to the climatic conditions, probably again to the main wind direction in the area. However, although these buildings have the same orientation, sometimes overlapping in terms of plans, they did not follow the same strict architecture or inner division. So there are different possible building techniques with trenches or without trenches, with different use of posts and clay and so on. And in the two entirely excavated buildings, we see also different planning of the buildings, different division, different places of the main facilities inside of them. So it seems that the households, at least at Yunatsite in this period, did not abate to some strict rules, but they felt free to make their houses and their living inside of them in their own way, although following the main settlement planning and its development in time. And this is the latest copper age settlement. Really, really interesting. The only one excavated on the entire eastern part of the Teu, as I already told you, dated to the final phase of the copper age in Thrace, showing some differences in the planning compared to the earlier ones. So all the buildings which I showed you from the lower levels are concentrated here, while here we have no single evidence of a building from this level. We have just this huge dug-in feature here. So there are some changes visible also in other parts of the culture of this level. However, we also attest continuation from the lower levels. 12 buildings have been excavated so far. In each of them, an oven has been found, different storage facilities, usually interpreted as grain storages. But during the Bulgarian Greek excavations, we also excavated two interesting structures which can be interpreted as meat storages, two partially dug into the ground pits, plastered with hydrophobic clay, under which they were tightly covered with sherds from fragmented vessels. And under these vessels, remains of animals have been found. In both structures, altogether, remains of 9 lambs and 1 calf. The content analysis shows that the meat was not salted, but there is evidence of smoking on the bones, obviously to preserve the meat. This is just a tentative reconstruction of these features, and we can interpret them as a kind of facilities for a long-term presentation of larger quantities of meat. And again, this is the restored vessel that has been smashed to cover this feature here. If you remember, it is almost identical to the one from the building from level 3, showing again the continuity of these storage vessels in terms of shape, dimensions, and the motifs which they were decorated with. Again, obviously transferring some symbolic meaning. And another really interesting feature that we were able to excavate in the last years, in fact, we're still excavating it. It is quite complex and slowly working. It is situated in the southern periphery, just abutting the fortification wall, which rides here. And it is a burnt building, which was built on top of a big negative feature. This big negative feature is almost 7 meters in diameter, and the burnt building, uncovered, has partially been built on the solid ground around the negative feature, but also partially built on top of a wooden platform. We found remains of some of this wooden platform at some points, covering the southern part of this negative feature, with a high concentration of pottery in this above ground part, also womb weights, grinding stones, and all other parts of the typical building or house inventory. Although the quite really unusual place of this building over this negative feature, it has been burned down with the entire last copperite settlement, but probably it stayed for some time on the supports of this platform before it finally collapsed, and in very strange way, more or less stuck on the south wall of this negative feature, falling also in the hollow space of the negative feature. Under it remains concentration of different pottery and anthropomorphic figurines and so on was found connected with the uppermost building level. And going down, at this point, we have excavated more than 8.5 meters from this negative feature. We still have not reached its bottom, but in the last season that we excavated, a groundwater pop up at this level. So at this point, we had to stop excavations. For sure, it continues more than 8.5 meters down from its upper part. In its lower part, the remains of unburned wooden planks have been revealed, all of them with a sharp inclination towards the center of the feature, probably remains of collapsed platform, wooden platform. The interpretation of this negative feature is still debatable, but at least for me, it is most probable that this was a kind of big communal well. Another important part of the last copperite settlement at Yunatsite is the quite rich collection of copper artifacts, 24 at this point, different kinds of them, awls, needles, decorative pins, some heavy tools like these 2 hammer axes, most of them concentrated in the northeast part of the settlement together with 2 probable crucibles. So maybe speaking of some kind of local metallurgical activities, and another golden find, this small golden spiral. The pottery from the Copper Age settlement is really, really varied and lavishly decorated with different shapes, sizes, obviously adjusted to the different functions of these pots that the people needed. but also with very lavish and decoration in different techniques, graphite, incised, stamped, and so on. So for sure, we may speak of some specialized pottery production. For sure, not every household was able to make this kind of pottery. We don't have no traces of pottery kilns at this point, but again, the pottery itself suggests that there was a kind of specialized production. Also, a very varied collection of figurines, anthropomorphic, zoomorphic, some strange-looking ones like this, probably connected with the beliefs and deities of these people. And what is typical of the last, but not the earliest settlements at Yunatsite are these ornithomorphic or bird-like figurines. More than 100 of them have been found, usually representing birds, schematic representation of flying birds, sometimes, however, with rather human-like but not bird-like faces. So maybe a kind of merged image of bird and a human, whether this is a deity or a representation of the beliefs regarding the spirits of the ancestors or something else is difficult to speak. But we do have some evidence from the very last season that they were connected with some specific rituals. So this is a pit in which two fragments of such figurines were found together with the bones of at least 4 birds, probably jays. Skulls and legs of these birds are missing. Most of the bones are from the wings. So let's roughly say the most birdy part of the birds. All of them bear traces of burning, which again suggests some specific rituals performed here connected with the beliefs regarding the birds. And finally, the end of the Copper Age, which is marked by really, really interesting situation. So all of these 12 buildings that I already showed you have been burned down. And after their burning down, the settlement has been abandoned for almost 1,000 years. Under the destructions of these buildings, human skeletal remains have been found in usually abnormal positions, sometimes bearing perimortem fractures on the skulls, sometimes also on the walk bones, speaking about violent interactions that caused the death of these people. Also, some rapid burials were found outside the buildings, maybe also connected with the attack that caused the end of the settlement life here. The anthropological analysis performed also by Steve Zoyner, who is here with us today, showed interesting results, including very interesting example of early surgery. We can call it surgery, I think, because this is an amputation, successful amputation of one arm of a woman, which has been healed, and the woman lived far long after these events. So just a quick summary of what I tried to present you up until now. Going back to forth with the last thing I showed you, Yunatsite is one of the few sites in the Balkans with clear evidence how the life of the Chalcolithic society ended, at least at this site. Probably most of you know there is a huge ongoing debate about the reasons of the end of the Copper Age society in the end of the 5th millennium, and for sure I don't want to go into this now. But at least at Yunatsite, we do have clear evidence that the settlement has been destroyed by attack. And at the same time, we do have quite clear evidence based on the physical anthropology analysis, based on the botanical and osteological and zoological analysis, that these people had normal life, that they did not suffer by any specific diseases or by malnutrition or something else. They had quite varied and quite rich diet with very good crops, with a number of animals they raised and hunted and so on. So we did not see any profound change in their life and their subsistence before they were attacked and killed. We also have important insights of the life of the Copper Age people, including their diet, medicine, beliefs, and ritual as well. We have evidence of complex settlement patterns, including this, let's roughly call it Acropolis in the fortified part of the site, or the Tel settlement. And the off-tail site, at least part of the off-tail site obviously has been related to some economic but not dwelling activities. We do have evidence of craft specialization, specific signs that have been repeatedly found on pottery, figurines, and even one oven speak of some symbolic meaning that has been transferred through time through the entire Copper Age. We do have sure evidence of well-developed trade networks both to the south and the north. Most of the flint, which is the most important material for the tools these people used, come from the rich sources of high quality flint, the so-called Bulgarian flint in nowadays northeastern Bulgaria, including one collective find of macro blades from this region found at Yunatsite. Also, a large number of Spondylo shells, as I already told you, which come from the North Aegean coast, including some specific sherds of black on red pottery, also pointing towards trade networks with this area. And also very interesting evidence of early copper and gold metallurgy, especially the last season's finds of early golden jewelry suggest that maybe this was one of the places of earliest golden metallurgy in Europe. And it should not be that surprising, because very close to Yunatsite here in the Sredna Gora mountains, there are rich sources of both copper and also one of the richest sources of gold in Southeast Europe, the one close to Panaguriște. All of the rivers in this area are gold bearing even nowadays, after hundreds and even thousands of years of their use. They're still gold bearing, and here Tupolnice is was one of the richest gold bearing rivers in the area, and again probably in the Copper Age it ran just close to the tail, so it is very probable that people just saw gold nuggets here, and the idea of using this material emerged in some of them. So these are just some of the results that we have, with some interesting points that I liked to highlight. Thank you for your attention and your patience, and thanks for all the people, all the institutions who supported us in the last years of excavations, and to all the people and colleagues who have been part of the excavations at the TEL, some of them presenting this evening. I'd like to see all of you, and special thanks to Javor as well, and all these guys here who have been the core of the team in the last season. Thank you again.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Kamen, for this very rich in so many kinds of information lecture. You gave us a lot of food for discussion and for thoughts. You touched on so many questions, starting by the methodology of excavation. So it's a fantastic example of if you compare the old trench dug by Vasil Mikov in the middle of the site, almost the middle of the site, how much you miss if you don't look at the periphery, what the Greek Bulgarian team did, or how much the importance of large-scale excavation is, which we owe a lot to the Russian Bulgarian, large-scale approach. Then we have the eternal question about flat site, tail site, what the importance of this, how should we interpret these tail sites, fortification, wine, of course, wine is very important, or let's say grape, as you said, grape drink. It's fundamental because of the social importance of such kind of drink, but also the economic. We know how much very well from later periods, the importance for trade, for interaction, for the accumulation of wealth. And of course, my highlight is this one-handed woman who not only got saved, but also she survived. and were able to live many years, and it's clear that it was kind of social phenomenon. So her family or people who helped her. So the floor is open for discussion.
Just a quick question. Do you prefer me to stop sharing my screen or leave it if we have to go
probably
back?
to stop
Okay.
sharing. It's very easy to reshare it if
Yes. Okay.
the discussion brings us to one or the other picture. I would ask you to start it again. Okay. The floor is open. I personally prefer when people ask their questions. So please unmute yourself and ask your question in person. You can just drop a line in the chat telling that you have a question, so that if there are many questions, I can just order them. But of course, if you prefer and you're not tired of my accent, you can also write it in the chat and I will read it for you.
May I?
Yes, Kyria Aslani. It's a great pleasure to see you.
Nice to meet you. To see you.
Скъпи приятели. Мога да говорим по-български. I miss this language really. So, искам да благодарим Kamen за това много информативна презентация за новите разкопки в телегунаците.
Can I translate for our audience, Professor Slanis, because we have so many people who don't speak Bulgarian?
But it's not important. Only to thank. I would like to thank Kamen. Находните са много импресив, но е сигурно, че селището има още какво да разкрие. Сигурно. Пожелавам на него и на неговата група сила. Продължавате с добрата работа.
Много благодаря, Янис, и много благодаря за всичко, което и ти си направил за юнаците, което е основа за това, което знаем в момента.
And now my question. You mentioned the fortification on the south part of the settlement, Chalcolithic settlement. We've touched it also in the western part with sectors M and N. Have you found something similar in the eastern edge of the settlement?
No, the eastern edge, unfortunately, is heavily eroded. I did not place picture here, but even parts of the buildings from the even down to the sixth, we have went down to the sixth building level from the Copper Age. Even the buildings from the sixth building level are partially eroded. So if there was a fortification wall, it is somewhere down into the field. Unfortunately, all the eastern part is very heavily eroded.
In the southern part, easternwards, this wall stopped, as I remember, if I remember well.
Yes.
I'm not sure we have not found any continuity to the east, and therefore I suppose that this construction surrounded only the western part of the settlement, which has contact to the land, to the cultivated land to the west.
It is very
We supposed at this time too, we discussed about it, that it is very possible to have the main entrance of the settlement in the western part of the settlement. Near the sectors MN.
MN10. Yeah, I absolutely agree, because to the east, if, as we assume and as we have discussed, if the river was there making this meander, it may have provided some kind of natural defense. So they may have made the fortification just on the other side where the river was not flowing next to the settlement. So it is possible, yes, that there was not a fortification in the eastern part, and that the entrance was to the west. I absolutely agree with you.
The excavation plan you follow till now, it's very important to finish it. But in another next excavation plan, please take care about this part of the settlement, the western part, because it is important to find the contact of the settlement to the land. The
I
eastern
know
part.
we do have some plans on this, hopefully
Yes, okay.
next years.
I'm very glad to hear it. Thank you very much. And again, congratulations to you and your team.
Thank you, Yanis. Thank you. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Thank you also. We have several questions in the chat, but people who would like to ask their questions have priority, and then I'll read also the questions in the chat after that. So if someone wants to speak. Okay, then I'll read them.
Well, actually, whoop, excuse me. Hi.
Brent, yeah.
Yeah, I
Hi,
suppose
Brent.
just to continue
You
with
have
this line
questions?
of, yeah, well, not a question, but what Dr. Aslan just said, something kind of jumped to my mind because I've read a paper that he's published as well, if I'm identifying him correctly. But anyhow,
Yes.
when you speak of the erosion in the east of the site, then is it possible that this is also sort of a byproduct of the fact that there was no fortification wall there?
It is.
Or so there might
It
be
is.
indirect evidence of no existence of a fortification wall.
Yeah, yeah, it is.
Interesting.
It might
Sorry,
be. Mhm.
this just jumped in my
Absolutely.
head through the ongoing discussion. Thank you.
Good point. Good point. Absolutely.
Okay. Other questions in person?
I have a question, but I cannot switch my camera somehow.
Elena
It is Elena
Marinova.
Marinova.
Hi, Elena.
Hi, Kamen. Great presentation, very inspiring, very interesting. I have a more or less technical question concerning this deep pit, which you consider that it could be a well. Were taken some sediments or some sediment profiles for pollen analysis. When you have wood preservation, this means probably that there will be very good organic preservation, and this could be also archive of the local environment at that time.
Well, okay, that's a good point, and maybe we have to discuss it with you. We have taken samples, but not really make let's say a sequence with the idea of pollen sequence. That's something that we haven't done. But we still continue excavation there, and we still have the profiles there. So it is something that we can discuss. And
would be very interesting.
Yeah, okay, that absolutely agree. We have taken samples, but not with the idea of, let's say, pollen sequence. But yeah, I'm open to discuss this with you in detail, and for sure it still can be done.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Elena. Other questions? Okay, then I'll start reading, and if someone, okay. Carol Snyder, what types of economic activity might have been conducted in trenches 20 and 21?
Okay, this is a question which, okay, or I rather try to avoid the answer of this question. So honestly, we still don't know. And again, this is a very fresh result from the last season. So we reached this part of trench 20 in the last season. We still are discussing. We're still planning what kind of analysis we should make. I can rather say what was not done there, or at least we don't have evidence of it. We don't have evidence of pottery production. I would rather say these were fireplaces, but not kilns, because they have very thin floors, no evidence of domes, and so on. We do not have evidence of metallurgical activities as well. No remains of slag or whatever connected to metallurgical activities. For me, it is still problematic whether what was more important, the process of burning, let's say the heat and so on, or the thing that they burnt, which can be one reason for this. The other thing was the accumulation of ash itself. So the ash as well can be used for many different things, for like anti-insecticide, for preservation of some stuff, for treatment of height and other things. So I still don't know the answer even of this question, whether they needed the ash or they needed to burn something, or both of them for different things. still we are about to discuss, to make analysis. We had different samples, different ideas of things to analyze. But at this point, I cannot answer for sure this question. But I'm open to suggestions.
Okay, thank you very much. I see a hand raised by Ian. Forgive me if I don't pronounce the family name properly.
That's quite all right. There's no reason anybody would know how to pronounce that name. Kamen, thank you very much, Kamen, for a really detailed and rich presentation of all the materials. And yes, congratulations, especially with the well. I think that is indeed what you have there, and I think it's just fantastic. My question for you relates to the food storage. You showed that one floor plan, the big excavation plan with the buildings and with the food storage. Could you say a little more in terms of where food storage is taking place inside of the buildings, if there's any storage features or bins outside of the building, and also maybe something about the scale of those? It was a little unclear to me whether you're talking about fairly substantial half-meter by half-meter bins or just in pottery or something else. So anything more about food storage would be fascinating to hear.
Okay. So at least by now, we do not have evidence of some food storage places outside of the buildings. All of what we have attested is placed inside of the buildings. So from the buildings, from the first building level, most of them have been excavated by the 90s. So most of them I know mainly by documentation. I have been during the excavation of these buildings. According to the documentation, to what I have seen, and few things that we have excavated afterwards, there are in the latest corporate settlement, there are two different kinds of food storage facilities. One of them are, let's say, facilities, bins that have been partially dug into the ground and partially built over, clay plastered with quite substantial, let's say, between 3 and 5 centimeters a layer of clay. So try to isolate, obviously, like hydrophobic clay and so on. Try to isolate it from any risks from humidity and so on. Usually they measure up to 1 meter. So let's say between 70 centimeters by 1 meter, something like this. And the other storage facilities are big storage vessels. Some of them reaching to, let's say, more than 30 liters. Some of them are really big. So let's say height of about 1 meter, diameter of more than 70 centimeters, and so on, like the two big ones which I showed you. So in the uppermost settlement, both of them coexist in the buildings. In the lower building levels, building level 2 and 3 especially, because there we have entirely excavated buildings. We lack at this point sure evidence of storage bins. We do have some clay plastered features, which may have been storage facilities, but in all cases, and there are just few cases, but all of them have been found empty. So we do not have sure evidence that they were used for food storage. It can be just a guess. But we do have a large number of storage vessels, again, big storage vessels. And at least in these lower levels, we do have evidence of special places inside the buildings where these storage vessels were concentrated. So let's say a kind of storage premises where the food supplies were kept inside these big storage vessels. And the clay plastered features, again, in these buildings, usually are in other places. They are not in these storage premises. So again, for me, these clay plastered features are debatable whether they were grain storages or not. Speaking for the lower levels, the uppermost settlement, they do have evidence about grain storages inside these bins. So, if this answers your question.
It does. It was a great answer. Just a quick follow-up then. Are some of them, the location of those, Would they be more towards one corner of the room? Would they be a separate little alcove? How was it organized in such a way where storage was physically separated from, should we say, fire hearths or other residential areas?
In the houses where do have evidence, though they are not a lot, in the houses where do have evidence, there it's not like some additional, let's say, something added to the building. It's inner space inside the building, which has been divided with at least one wall. Usually this wall is made by quite tiny posts, and I may not say for sure whether this was a complete wall, so covering the entire height of the building space, or just, let's say, a semi-wall, because the posts are much smaller than the ones of the main walls, the surrounding walls of the building. But for sure there was a kind of division wall separating this storage place from the other part of the building.
That's great. Thank you very much. I'll send you an email with what you just described is very similar to what is going on in Chalcolithic early bronze in southern Jordan, in areas of Jordan. And there's a great article by Meredith Chesson that deals with storage, which is describing almost exactly the same kind of dichotomy of how things are working. So I'll send that to you as a PDF.
Perfect. I would be really grateful, and we can continue discussion on this. Thanks. Thanks.
Sounds good. Thanks again.
I also thank you. It's an honor to have you here, Jan. I'm teaching your text, so I can't pronounce your family name, but my students know your text about the Neolithic in the Near East. So,
Okay.
And Kamen, you know for sure better than I that they have a good data on storage vessels in Pietrele with several hundreds of liters volume. So it might be a good idea to compare them and to see the situation where they found them. Okay. If no one wants to speak, I will continue reading. Hans Krauch, do you think this attack was an isolated incident between neighbors or evidence of a larger invasion? And here I might add, I remember having said by Steve Zeuner, Steve, correct me if I'm wrong, that Steve Zeuner is the physical anthropologist who processed the bone material. So you told me, Steve, that you don't see signs of malnutrition in the bones of these people. So, which is quite important for all these theories about climatic stress or kind of problem with economy, organization so far. I might add this to Hans Krauch's question.
Yeah, absolutely. It's taking word for what you said. Yes, absolutely. At Yunatsite, we do not see evidence of malnutrition, of change, as I try to say, of change of their subsistence, of some kind of worse conditions of the crops or something else. Whether it was an isolated event or not, maybe somewhere in between. So not an isolated event for sure. We do have some other sites from the same period, the latest phase of the Copper Age in Bulgaria, which share the same situation, like Hotnice, like Ruse, for sure, both of them. And maybe a couple of more with less sure information. But for sure, we do have evidence of some, let's say, warlike events or some attacks over settlements in the very end of the Copper Age in some other parts of Bulgaria. On the other hand, we have a number of tell sites from the final phase of the Copper Age where we do not have this information. So, or the settlements may have been burned down, the latest settlements, but without the human skeletons found in them. So then it is quite speculative to say whether they have been destroyed by enemy attack, but people were able to escape, or they were just burned down in some other, for some other reasons. So let's roughly say again, somewhere in between. For me, it is not an isolated event. But on the other hand, we do not have sure traces that this was a kind of, let's say, invasion which happened at once and destroyed everything. It may have been like different, like if we use, for example, although very roughly, but if we use, for example, all the nomadic invasions during the Great Migration period, people who come and go, let's say one season they come, destroyed some settlements, then the other season they come again, and the local people are pressed to move. Sometimes moving by, they themselves may attack somebody else. So I do not imagine like a kind of one-wave scenario which destroyed everything. But I also think that there can be some, let's say, warfare tensions, maybe caused by some people coming, causing this, which were a part of what caused the end of the Copper Age. For me, it was not an isolated event what happened at Yunatsite. But again, we do not have a number of other sites. We have some other sites showing the same situation, but not a great deal of them. So there are different possible hypotheses.
Yes, thank you. To those who are not familiar, I may add that for some reason we don't find necropolises, burial places from this area.
Yeah, in Thrace we almost,
which makes Yunatsite unique and important, but also makes the interpretation of the evidence more complicated, because the first you can compare with, for example, to the east is the Black Sea area. Okay, the next question stays with bones. Are there any DNA studies on the remains by Nelly Ashmore?
Yes, there are. There is an ongoing project, and we're still waiting for some of the results, and it is still about to be published. So I would prefer not to share it at this point. But there is an ongoing DNA project with the Max Planck Institute, and the initial results are quite promising. There are DNA studies both on the Copper Age individuals, but also in the early Bronze Age there are some burials found in the settlement, like regular burials in different phases of the early Bronze Age. So there are also DNA studies in the early Bronze Age, and the comparison in between them is also interesting. So we do have such studies. We do have some initial promising results, but I hope that maybe in the next year we'll be able to publish them. So wait for this, please.
Another lecture next year. It's very simple.
Yeah.
Pavel Georgiev, who is a PhD student working on the 4th millennium in Sozopol and the Western Black Sea coast. And of course, he's interested in the hiatus, so between the late Chalcolithic and the early Bronze Age. Do you plan to do research in details?
Hiatus in terms of chronological hiatus or in terms of stratigraphic hiatus, or maybe I'll try to answer both. So in terms of stratigraphic hiatus, well, what was visible, it is already excavated, so we do not plan any other, there is nothing more to do on, regarding this at this point, maybe. But there was, and in the central profile of the tail, it is still visible. In some places, especially in the periphery of the tail, the stratigraphic hiatus is quite well visible, marked by quite homogeneous, dark grayish, loose soil. In terms of chronology, there is a large series of C14 dates, both from the Copper Age and the early Bronze Age layers. And the C14 dates show at least 1,000 years of chronological hiatus at Yunatsite, between the latest Copper Age settlement and the earliest early Bronze Age settlement. So for sure, the site was abandoned for about 1 millennium. And it is namely the 4th millennium. Yeah, the big problem with the 4th millennium. I understand the question, but yes, I don't think that we can add too much more on this problem at this point at Yunatsite.
So
if this answers the question, I don't know.
Pavel, we don't have a 4th millennium. Your work in Sozopol and Eropotamo area is even more important, because
absolutely.
Our only chance to see what happens in the 4th millennium. Now
by the way, just a very quick add, because this may be interesting to Pavel. just 1 year ago, like local people from the Belovo Museum told me and showed me some pottery and told me about accidentally found site, which according to the pottery should be beginning of the 4th millennium, which is in the northern slopes of the Eroded mountains, so not that much far away from Yunatsite. And it goes up in the mountains, so it fits with this idea that in the beginning of the 4th millennium, at the end of the Chalcolithic, let's say this beginning of the 4th millennium, then people moved to the mountains. But it's just like a very brief piece of information from the surrounding area. It's for sure we still much more investigation about this in the area, but so far 4th millennium is missing in this part.
Now we are moving to the 3rd millennium. Linda Honey asks, were they other baby or children remains? What, if anything, could you deduce from the baby burial in the jar? And we have a couple of more questions, so please give it.
Okay, I'll try to be short. So yes, there are. I don't remember by heart the number. I think there were something like 30, maybe 28 or something like this, baby burials from the early Bronze Age, from the tail. So we have this one from the trench, from the tail, from different levels of the tail. There are about 30 more baby burials in jars, usually under the floor of the houses. So obviously there is some trend, some tradition of burying either born dead babies or infants which died soon after they were born. So these were usually just either dead born or infants in like few months old. And obviously there was some special attitude towards them. And some of them have been also DNA analyzed, but again, this is still to be
for the next lecture, for next year. Thank you. The next question comes from someone who entered the meeting from his cell phone, so we don't know the name, but it's about in which levels were the black on red shirts found? Do you have such from the early Chalcolithic structures, trenches?
Not the early at this point. Most of them, there are 6, I think, at this point, and all of them come from the 3rd building level, which is the beginning of the late Chalcolithic.
Okay, thank you. If we stay with pottery, I might add a question. So these grapes are impressive, and of course, together with the evidence from the Kilitash, it's a convincing argument that people started to do something with grapes, probably wine. Do you see differences? You know, I'm a Bronze Age guide, so not very familiar with pottery. Do you see some changes in the pottery? Because if you start to do wine, you would need closer vessels, closer shapes, you know, the grandmother of the amphora.
Yeah.
Otherwise, it will get a kind of, you know.
Mm-hmm. Yes, so unfortunately, we do not have too large look on the pottery assemblages from the lower level. So from level 4th downwards, 4, 5, 6, we still have excavated quite small parts, and we do not have very full view over their pottery assemblage. From the level 3 on, and for sure in level 2, where we have these grape seeds, we have exactly this. Okay, let's roughly call it amphora-like shapes, although usually they lack these amphora handles. Sometimes they have handles on the belly, on the maximal diameter. But they have this, again, this shape which goes like this, and yeah, so tightening much toward the neck. Whether they're connected with wine, I don't know, but yes, they do, for sure they do present at Yunatsite in the late Chalcolithic. And I may not say for the earlier periods at this point.
Thank you, thank you. Carol Snyder, what might have been heated in the decorated oven in layer B5?
I may not say. As I showed you, unfortunately, we almost lack, for sure we have no evidence of the dome of this oven, though we suggest it was an oven. We have just very small part of its floor plaster preserved. Most of it in horizontal is under our central profile or destroyed by 2 later pits. So the horizontal is almost lacking. We have mainly the 2 of the walls. One of them is this decorated one, the other one is undecorated. In terms of general construction, excluding the decoration, in terms of general construction of the preserved part, it looks very much like the other domestic ovens that we have in the other buildings. So I don't think that it had some more specific function than a domestic oven. So used for just for heating and probably for cooking. It might have had different function, but we do not have any evidence for this. And for me, it is very possible that it was just the normal oven decorated, because in the Chalcolithic, we have a number of other evidences, not from Yunatsite itself, or even from Yunatsite, but in larger scale in many other sites of decorations of the houses, like wall plasters with decorations, even with drawings and so on, in the normal houses, which have typical inventory and so on, so nothing which speaks of some different function of these houses. So for me, the people at the Copper Age just loved art. They loved to express themselves. And on one hand, on the other hand, there were specific symbols, as I said, which I do believe had specific symbolic meaning for them. And they might have used them to protect or something their storages or the places where they're making their food and so on. So again, for me, this might have just well been a normal domestic oven, but we do not have evidence to say for sure whether or not.
Thank you. The microphone goes on Professor Reiko Kraus from the University of Tübingen.
Yeah, thanks for the professor, my dear.
You are.
Yeah, as I have to leave soon, I just wanted to thank you personally. And I have no question, I just have a comment. I like very much the idea that the outer settlement surrounding the tell is more connected to economic purposes than living in, because it turns a bit the perspective. So for the last decades, we were always talking about concentration on the tell, specific purposes on the mount in comparison to the surrounding villages, and this gives a new idea, so that they just lived on a tell and the special things happen outside. That's very inspiring. I like that.
I don't want to generalize at this point, but at least at this part of the settlement at Yunatsite, this is the picture we see. So yes, I absolutely agree with you that this gives us different perspective.
Yeah, thanks for the lecture. And yeah, Bogdan, thanks for organizing the event. And I'm very sorry that I have to leave. And
thank you for coming
soon, in real life.
Bye, Reiko. Thanks.
So we do. Thank you for coming. Saturday evening. It's difficult, I know. Yes.
May I add something to this point? The large settlements in the end of the late Neolithic and maybe the beginning or early Chalcolithic are very common. They have no or maybe one palisade around it, but they are wide and no very very close with distance, so to say better, between the houses. There is the houses are not very close because there is a lot of space. In the end of the late Bronze Age and the beginning of the early Chalcolithic, something happens, and the same people, they construct smaller settlements with very close buildings, and this is for me there is one reason for me. security. We have the example of Makrigalos in Greece, near Olympus. They had in this phase, in this time, a large settlement, white settlement, and after that, they try during this life of the settlement, they try to build around it a ditch and maybe with a palisade to fortificate, to protect it. It was not possible because it was a couple kilometers of in the periphery. They let it half ready, and they make a new one, smaller, with ditch and wall. This is a wide phenomenon in the Southeast Europe, to say, and I don't know exactly what is the danger for this, but it is a phenomenon you can see in the whole Southeast Europe.
Thank you. We have time for a couple more questions, one or two. Brent wanted to ask something, then you raised your hand. Do you still?
No, it was about the decorated oven. I wanted to add, and if Kamen will allow me, that next to that oven, there was like a sort of maybe added shelf or segment with some evidence of charred grain, I believe, just adding to the fact that it was very likely just a domestic oven. And,
yes, absolutely.
Nothing special other than its decoration. And its size,
that's right. That's right. Yeah.
Okay.
Alexander Gonzalez asks, were there any evidence of buildings of more than one level?
Like two-story buildings? Not at this point.
Not at this point. Okay.
Not at Yunatsite. There are two-story buildings in other corporate settlements in the area, but not at Yunatsite at this point.
Yes. Again, Carol, do you think the building orientation would have been most beneficial for heating in the winter or cooling in the summer?
I may not say for sure, but for me, the wind problem, the building orientation, for me is rather related to the direction of the winds in terms of how to say this kind of tunnel effect, because when you have such kind of planning of the settlement, when you have like a kind of, let's say, small streets, narrow streets in between the houses, if you turn these streets toward the direct direction of the wind, it goes in like a tuna when it more or less you feel the wind even stronger than otherwise. So as the wind here comes usually directly from the west, and again it is just the tunnel effect again because it follows the pass, this so-called Traianului Vrata Pass, which is in between the Sredna Gora mountains, which is opened from directly west to east. So it blows to the east into the Măriță River Valley, west to east. And if it blows into your, let's say, street in the settlement, you just feel it stronger. If you turn your buildings in a way to avoid the direct, direct direction of the wind into these, let's say, streets, you can reduce this wind effect. For me, this was the reason. Whether this made them feeling more warm in the winter or cooler in the summer, I may not say. But I think the main reason was to avoid this kind of, let's say, funnel effect of the wind.
They also wanted to have the nice view facing the white peaks of the mountains.
Of the river mountains and
the river mountains, which you and I like so much.
Absolutely, absolutely.
So thank you very much, Kamen. Thank you to all of you who contributed to this quite interesting discussions with so many questions. Apologies for not being able to read one or two who left. Now I would like to invite you to our next seminar, which will be given by David Hendricks, who is the founder of Byzantine Legacy website, who in exactly 1 month, on March 5th, will be talking about the seen and unseen, the current situation of Istanbul mosaics. Thank you for your attention. Goodbye.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Bogdan. Goodbye.
Bye.
Thank
Thank you.
Good to see everyone. Bye.